Hello, Pittsburgh. This is TribLive's From the Newsroom podcast, bringing you top stories from TribLive.com. I'm your host, Zac Gibson, and in this episode, we'll be talking about the occurrences, impacts, and the feelings surrounding the higher ed divide using Penn State's recent restructuring announcement as our base. Here to guide us through this is higher education reporter Bill Schackner. Hi, Bill.
Hi.
So, can you tell us about this recent change in Penn State's new system? Explain the regional model and tell me a little bit about the background of branch campuses.
Myself and Megan Swift, a colleague, were taking a look at this issue for Sunday's paper. Branch campuses at Penn State date as far back as the 1930s. They were initially seen as helping students who were place-bound during the Depression to get an education, get a flagship education closer to home. And they have evolved over the years as, the enrollments grew and the population on campuses expanded. They became, in some cases, feeders for the main campus. But as the university developed four-year programs on a number of these campuses, a number of students graduated and spent all 4 years at the branches. But what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is enrollments have dropped. There's been some pretty substantial declines in the birth rate, but also other societal factors that have weighed on college enrollment.
Okay, so there is a sort of divide between the direction of the branch campuses and the direction of the University Park location. Mm-hmm. So University Park, which is the main campus for Penn State, projects an increase of 825 students, and that would push the enrollment to over 50,000, which is more than Penn State's ever seen. Its branch campuses will lose about 10% of their staff and faculty. Can you do a little bit more to explain this divide that could potentially be the new trend in higher education?
Yeah, it's interesting. Demographers and researchers have been talking about this sharp drop in the birth rate nationally during the Great Recession of 2008 and how that was going to wash up on college campuses in the next year or two. And to an extent, that's still true. But a couple things have happened since this discussion started in the 2015, 2016. And that's that the pandemic hit and it really disrupted enrollment patterns. It all but shut some schools down. And in fact, some of the campuses got to enrollment levels they were not expecting to approach until right about now. In addition to that, something else happened with perceptions about higher education generally in the job market. There has been growing skepticism about whether a four-year degree is worth it as opposed to a shorter credential that will get you into what's a pretty robust job market right now. And part of it's fueled by the cost of higher education and the growing student debt. But it's even more profound than that. The Pew Research Center found that less than half of adults it surveyed felt a four-year degree was worth it, even if they did not have to pay back loans.
Wow. So another thing that I saw related to this issue with enrollment is it's caused some schools to close. Like just recently over the past week, PTC announced that it was closing at the end of their term. And I also see in your story that you say that there are small schools that aren't really surviving as strongly as these bigger named schools. I think I saw one part that said one private school per week is around the rate that closures are happening now, correct?
Right. I mean, estimates vary depending on whether you're considering only nonprofit versus nonprofit and for-profit, and if you're counting a branch of an institution closing when the overall institution doesn't. But yeah, the pace has definitely picked up. The things that I was talking about a moment ago, the thing is they're not hitting higher ed in any uniform way. And that's where this divide comes in. If you look at the Penn States, the other flagship institutions and private elite institutions that are well endowed, have a national brand, they're still attracting students and bringing in record numbers of applications. It's a different story on a lot of the regional public and private schools, in particular private schools that have small endowments and have been struggling with enrollment losses for years. They seem to be in a much different place in the market than these flagships. And it was not as much of an issue when enrollment was stronger generally, when the student market was stronger generally. But now that you have fewer residential students, you have these doubts about higher education. It's particularly hitting home for some of these small schools.
Okay. The undergrad market isn't great, in part due to the worries of the cost and the debt of college, and some just the dissent in opinion of the value of a four-year degree. So it's been essentially in a lull for years, really. Despite this, University Park's location is expanding to accommodate more students. I noticed that the Palmer Museum of Art is being renovated to be able to accommodate a host of general purpose classrooms and circulation and support to go with it. And I think you said this, but from 9,175 to 9,500 this fall is what they're trying to expand to as far as their housing capacity allows. And they're trying to move towards 10,000 students in their enrollment in future enrollment cycles. So with University Park growing, the branches aren't pleased about how it's negatively affecting them. We see that Pennsylvania residents make up 77% of the population for the branch campuses and only 52% of the University Park population. The branches have also seen a 14.1% reduction. University Park has only seen a 1.7% reduction. So it seems like the resources are being shifted away from these branches and more towards University Park.
It depends on your perspective. I think that there are people at Penn State in leadership who would say that actually they're shifting resources to where the demand is, where they feel the demand is. And that's the problem from the branch campus perspective, is they feel that, we serve a more primarily an in-state student population. We are less expensive than the main campus. And in their view, this is essentially incentivizing more expensive higher education, because obviously main campus prices are higher than the branch campus prices.
$94 million in spending cuts have been directed at the branch campuses recently, and the resources are being, as you said, shifted to where the demand is. Is there, in your opinion, is there something that could be driving more of the demand towards the main campus versus these branch campuses?
Well, I think it's partly the brand. I mean, like other flagship institutions, I mean, Penn State is a powerful brand. People will stretch themselves financially. Their families will stretch themselves financially to get their students into schools like that. So they are confident, or they believe that there is demand there to increase the enrollment to 10,000, first year enrollment to 10,000. It is a very difficult time right now demographically. And there are people who are wondering if even a place like Penn State, with its draw, can hit that kind of target. And I should say too, the leaders, including President Neeli Bendapudi, as they describe it, this is an effort to create a more sustainable model for the university. If they have higher enrollment because there's more demand in the main campus, then it makes sense financially for them to create capacity so those students can enroll there. But of course, it remains to be seen how successful they're going to be.
Now, members of the branch campuses from Penn State voiced concern about these changes. Something that we noted in the restructuring is that some of the locations will now be consolidated and be under the chancellor for PSU Allegheny, Megan Nagel. What's going to happen to the chancellors of the New Kensington and Fayette branches?
Well, the New Kensington branch, Kevin Snyder is chancellor, and he is staying until the end of the calendar year to work on the transition, the workforce project up there. And the Fayette chancellor, I believe, is also retiring. As for what's going to happen specifically, a lot of it still remains to be seen. What will this regionalization of the leadership look like? The question I think folks have is, what is this going to do in terms of staff assignments, program rep, and things like that? And in some ways, it's similar to what the state universities in Pennsylvania have gone through with the mergers of 6 of the 14 schools. People were very, very concerned and still are concerned ultimately with what the merged institutions are going to look like.
Let's talk a little bit about this comparative competition. For less selective schools, they seem to be competing for the students, and for more flagship schools, the students are actually the ones competing for their spots.
Mm-hmm.
Has this trend closed many schools or bolstered any schools?
Well, I mean, each school to an extent has its own set of circumstances. It seems clear that that's with the bulk of the institutions being small privates with small endowments, that it would tend to suggest that this is some of the result of the divide.
Now, talking about the college decision, for students and their families who look at the news and now struggle with their higher education landscape, many are asking if college is worth it. You pointed to the Pew Research result with less than half saying they felt it was worth it, even without taking on debt. Can you expand on some of the conversations you had with higher ed experts?
Well, what they're saying is that right now the economy is such that the job market, even for students right out of high school, is pretty robust. And some of the jobs and the disciplines that are most in demand are things that you do not necessarily need a 4-year degree to get, at least initially. But it's not an either or, because it may be true, and it probably is true, that you can jump into the job market with something less than a 4-year. But it might also be possible that as time goes on, if you want to progress in your career and increase your earnings, that you may want a 4-year degree and even beyond that. And that's true for even fields like nursing, where the demand is 2-year, 4-year strong.
Do you see this sentiment becoming something that could be a driving factor to lead to more of this trend in different institutions?
If the forecasts are as we're being told as far as enrollment, it certainly could be. I mean, one of the problems is schools are, many campuses are focused on residential students, traditional aged 17, 18 to 22, who live on campus. That means those campuses have residence halls, which now in many cases are significantly underused. You can do things in the short term to change your focus. You can modify programs, you can create programs. It's a little more complicated with buildings, because what do you do with a residence hall that you still have to maintain, and you may well still have debt on, but you can't bring in the income to pay for that? What do you do with it? How do you repurpose that? Or should you repurpose it? Or should you look for another use, look for a buyer? But that's easier said than done as well. I mean, there's been interest in using some halls for senior housing for other purposes, but that it takes time. It takes time to do something like that. You don't turn real estate over like that quickly. But there is one thing too. Is what I thought was interesting about the branch. I thought this was very interesting. Is you look at the branch campuses, and there are you hear from people that, there's not the demand there. It's just a stopping point before going to University Park. But my colleague talked to students on one of the branches and found that actually there's quite a bit of affinity for those places. And it's not as simple as I'm going to start at a branch and go to University Park. I mean, that certainly is a significant part of it. But people she talked to also spoke about the difference in environment. It's not a place with 40-some thousand students. It's a more intimate setting. It's essentially almost a small private setting at a public university price. So I think that's kind of interesting, and I think that's one thing that sometimes gets overlooked when people talk about dollars and cents, because not everybody wants to go to the main campus.
Well, Bill, thank you for joining me to lay out this topic for our listeners.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this week's episode, share the podcast to help keep Western PA locally informed with insightful discussion and the latest news from your area. It's an easy way to spread the word, and it helps our podcast reach more people like you. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and turn on episode notifications so you never miss new content. Once again, I'm Zac Gibson, and this is From the Newsroom.